I felt nothing beautifully horrifying. Bitterly disappointed by it. Now one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video we're going to be speaking all about books of the year so far, ranked from worst to best. Last year I did this where I ranked best to worst because I had a really divisive book that I did not like last year that a lot of people loved. However, this year we're doing a slightly less spicy version of this. I'm just going to be telling you guys my least favorite to favorite books of 2024 so far. So this list, if I can scroll through my handy dandy spreadsheet down here, I have, I think, 30-ish books on this list. And then two of the books on this list, I'm not actually going to be giving a ranking. Last year I also had books that I just didn't factor in because I felt weird ranking them, because these two books are written by people I know, and one of them is myself. It is Project Teacup, which I read so many times. How many times did I read Project Teacup? And I also read Lucy Richardson's book this year, which was an absolute delight, but also obviously not going to factor into the ranking here. So without further ado, let's jump into the video, and I'm going to start by speaking about the books that I DNF'd. The very first one is The Wishing Game by Meg Shaffer, I believe. This book was, to begin with, so very forgettable for me. The voice was not my fave. I bought the book kind of on a whim at the end of last year, which is not super like me, and there's another book in here that I also bought on a whim, also didn't love that book. So really, I should just stick to my morals and research everything I read. The next book I DNF'd is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I picked this up only a few weeks ago. I wanted to read it because I'd seen a lot of people talking about it, and I was strongly considering another reread of Twilight, which apparently at this point I now reread once a year just for fun. And so I was like, no, don't reread Twilight again, pick up a new book. I picked up Bride. I didn't get very far into the book. I've read Ali Hazelwood before. I read the Raylo, the one that was originally a Raylo fanfic, which is the name I can't remember right now. However, with Bride, I was looking for something fun and nostalgic in the kind of vein that Twilight is fun and nostalgic for me, and didn't really get that in the first 20 pages. I might pick it up again, but at this stage it's a DNF, and now I'm strongly considering reading Interview with a Vampire instead. The next book I DNF'd is a physical book that I own, and it is Don't Look Now and Other Stories by Daphne du Maurier. This is a short story collection. This DNF, unlike the first two, is more of a not right now DNF. The short stories in here, beautifully written, a little bit confronting in certain different ways that isn't super might be considered quite offensive. Like the first story in here just had like a real ableist twist in it that I was like, oof, okay. So not gonna lie, I was kind of put off by that. These stories are very creepy and gothic, but gothic in the kind of way that like Mulholland Drive is gothic. I started watching that film and I got to the first big jump scare and I was like, no, I'm out, goodbye, not watching this film. I love gothic, but like the Angela Carter Bloody Chamber kind of gothic, not this gothic as much. This makes me feel deeply unsettled and a bit unsafe. I might keep reading this. As I said, there was something in the first story that I really didn't like, but aside from that, just not vibing with right at the moment. So may come back to it, but currently a DNF. We're now going to jump into the 2-star books. So I never generally give 1 star for books unless it's really angered me. Generally, if it's going to be a 1-star book or if it's going to be a 2-star book, I will DNF it, which is why I never end up giving out 1 stars. So we're bypassing 1 star and jumping straight into the 2-star category. There's a small number of books on this list, kicking off with Story Genius, How to Use Brain Science to Go Beyond Outlining and Write a Riveting Novel. The author is Lisa Cron. I read this book because I got recommended to read it by someone, but they themselves had not read it. So basically, if someone recommends you to read a book and they themselves haven't read it, skip it. This book didn't really give me anything. This was kind of like characterization 101. There were a couple interesting little things here from a structural perspective on like how to move a scene forward, which I did respect, but I always dislike it when nonfiction books or self-help books, the amount of useful information they contain could actually be put in a blog post, but they've made an entire book out of it. I think if you're going to sell a nonfiction book to someone, you should give them more information than just like a 1 page's worth. The next one is the other book that I kind of impulse bought because it was a Friday going into a weekend and I just wanted like a fun atmospheric fantasy story, and it is The Moonlight Market by Joanne Harris, and I was so disappointed by it. There was no character depth at all, the world building was really weak, the plotting and pacing was pretty good, but everything just felt too easy, too contrived. There just wasn't anything solid about this book. Oh no, and then the next one is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. This is a very upset 2-star book. I picked up Fourth Wing and I knew what to expect. I knew it would be a very, very commercial, YA-leaning voice. I did not expect heaps of depth from the world building, but I accepted that and I knew what I was getting into. And the story overall was engaging and pretty fun. However, Iron Flame, whatever magic Fourth Wing had, this book did not have. I am so confused as to what the editor was doing with this book. Like, why was it so incredibly long? It didn't need to be that long. It just bogged down the story. The strength that Rebecca Yarros has as a writer is in the romance, and all of that was just frustrating in this book. There was a lot of like miscommunication trope going on. All of the twists and turns were predictable. I felt nothing. Bitterly disappointed by it. Moving along to the 3-star book category, and I'm kicking this off with a kind of divisive one, and this is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. We read this for the book club and I uploaded like a 24-minute video of me picking this book apart from a narrative perspective, the characters, world building, all this stuff. I gave that book 3 stars. I understand that this book is incredibly well loved, and in the same way that last year I really didn't like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, that book, we're not going to get into it. This book didn't upset me nearly as much as Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. However, I came away feeling like I'd read a different book to everyone else. Like, so many people love this book in With Piranesi. I don't even understand how you can put those 2 books in the same category. To my mind, they are so different, and I think the reason they get loved in the same category is because they're both quite interestingly structured and the prose is a little bit purple. But for This Is How You Lose the Time War, I felt like the prose was a bit overwrought. I felt like the characterization was really shallow. I felt the world building was really shallow. I felt like the twists and turns were all very predictable. I wanted to fall in love with this book and to fall in love with the characters, but I felt like I didn't know them at all. Ultimately, I was quite disappointed by it, but still gave the book 3 stars because I do respect that it was an incredibly ambitious idea. It's a very cool premise. The world building was myriad and it was very creative and it was very widespread, but just what it was wide but not very deep, if that makes sense. So it's like that a lot of bits of the world got described, but the logic of the world wasn't. I could keep talking about this for a very long time, and I already have over on Patreon if you want to see the video. The next book I want to talk about is A Perfect Day to Be Alone by Nanae Aoyama, translated from the Japanese by Jessie Kirkwood. This is a very short book about a young woman. From memory, I think she's 20, living in sort of the west suburbs of Tokyo. She doesn't want to go to university. She doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life, and she ends up moving in with this elderly cat lady and learning a lot about life from this woman. The story was very slow and very meandering. This book, however, I only gave, I think, 3.2 stars. It was good, it was enjoyable, but nothing really emotional gripped me. The characterization wasn't quite interesting enough to actually mean anything to me. This just kind of felt very samey to a lot of stuff I've already read, and just there wasn't anything terribly remarkable about it, but it was still like fine. The next one is a non-fiction book, and it's called The House That Joy Built by Holly Ringland. This is Holly Ringland's first non-fiction book. I listened to the audio version of this, which was Holly herself reading it. It was lovely. It was lovely to listen to. It was lovely to hear her ruminations on writing and her experiences. I didn't feel like I learned anything from it. Like, there wasn't anything I could like really take away and give to myself from the book. I did enjoy hearing about her process to becoming published. She's probably my favorite Australian contemporary author, like publishing in the contemporary fiction space. And so whenever she's at Adelaide Writers Week, or if she does like a talk here, I go and see her talk. And this book had a lot of the stuff that she'd already spoken about at other events, so I didn't feel like I really got anything new here. But I do really love Holly's writing, and I really appreciated listening to her story. So it's a 3.5. The next one is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. I enjoyed this book and also at the same time was quite disappointed by the ending. When I first picked up the book, I expected to adore it. Like, the first few chapters I was like, yes, I love this voice. This is going to be a 5-star novel. I found myself laughing out loud at the dry and sarcastic humor of this main character. I think her name is pronounced Celine, but I was calling her Selin for a while there. Really liked her character. I thought she was so interesting. I thought it was so cool to get a college novel from such a unique female voice. However, as the story just kind of went along, nothing really happened, but not in a good way. Like, we didn't really see significant growth in Celine, I don't think. Without giving spoilers, there's a point in the story where Celine kind of forms a relationship with someone, and just the way that went, I didn't vibe with it. I just found it quite disappointing. The blurb says, how does she deal with how difficult it is to be a failed writer and how baffling love is, but her identity as a writer and her working on her writing isn't really featured very much at all in this story. I think they were trying to make the blurb sound a little bit more grabby. This book had a lot going for it, but it just sort of petered off and meandered towards the end, and so I found that a bit disappointing. Although as I'm speaking about it, I feel like maybe it should be more like 3.7, but we'll stick with 3.5 for now. The next one is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. That's the same name. We have two Aoyamas on this list, I just realized. They are not related to my knowledge. Anyway, Michiko Aoyama wrote this book, and it's translated from the Japanese by Alison Watts. So this is a kind of episodic novel in a similar vein to Before the Coffee Gets Cold, where the novel is about several different people and how they all interact with one community space, which in this case is a library, and the librarian and how she finds books for people. There were qualities here that were whimsical and lovely. I really enjoyed getting to see the different perspectives of people interacting with the library. I particularly liked the story of the young man who was unemployed. I feel like the story was really affirming, quite a sweet story, and I really enjoyed it. It had some of the emotional depth that I would have wanted from this book, so I gave it 3.8 stars. It's almost a 4-star book. I think for me at the time, it just wasn't like unique enough, but again, I think this is a much better book than this one, or at least this spoke to me a lot more. And then the next one is Feel Good Productivity by Ali Abdaal. Ali Abdaal is a YouTuber. He makes a lot of like productivity content. I did enjoy this book. I gave it 3.9 stars. Like, for me, I am so scathing on non-fiction books. I'm like, you need to fill the whole book with interesting information. You can't just have, like, as I said earlier, a one-pager and then just peddle that the whole way through, like 200 pages. Like, you've got to provide value. And I think that this book did. Like, I really liked Ali's take on productivity. I think it was a really healthy way to look at productivity. I liked hearing about Ali's story. I listened to the audio version, which is Ali Abdaal reading it. So overall, I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting take on productivity, very healthy, very not extreme. The next one is a poetry collection by Tishani Doshi, which is called Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. This is a beautiful poetry collection. Now that I'm speaking about it, can't remember most of what I read. So I gave it 4 stars at the time. I did thoroughly enjoy it. I can remember bits and pieces, but I think that maybe says more about my headspace when I was reading this book versus the book itself. So I'll probably read it again before the end of the year, but I did really enjoy it and I gave it 4 stars. Another 4-star book was The Selected Poems of Emily Dickinson. Actually, I'm gonna give this a 4.4. No, 4.4. I would give this a 4.4. Look how many tabs I have in this. This was beautifully, beautifully written. I think Emily Dickinson is such a talent. There's so many poems in here that turns out I've read before, I've heard before, I've seen quoted before. I really just wanted to pick up Emily Dickinson's work because I felt so left out having never read it. Can I read any of these? How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. Beautiful, funny, relevant. What if, oh, here we go. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a begrudging 4 stars because I expected this book to be a 5-star book. I'd been putting off reading it because I assumed I would adore it. Again, how many times have I said that Never Let Me Go? It's one of my favorite books of all time, and maybe I should just go ahead and reread that book because no Kazuo Ishiguro novel has gotten to the heights of that story for me. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was beautifully written, like absolutely masterfully told. Amazing characterization. The subtext in this novel is amazing. The voice in this story is beautiful. The character journeys have a very gentle tragedy to them. But what I wanted from this novel is the punches of Never Let Me Go. And I understand that it's very unfair to go into reading a book expecting it to be exactly like another book the author has already written. But really what I was looking for was the magic of having read Never Let Me Go for the first time. This book that I loved so much, that made me sob, that made me want to throw the book across a room. I wanted that again, and I just didn't get that from this book. I wanted it to go deeper. I wanted it to be punchier. The next book is The Grace Keepers by Kirsty Logan. I'm so happy I finally finished this. It was a joy to read from the perspective of the language, the voice, the world building in this book is gorgeous, so atmospheric, so beautiful. This amazing flooded world where circus performers perform on these boats and they go to different islands, and there was such a whimsical, gently sad beauty to this world. The reason why it was a 4-star book and not a higher rating for me is because it just didn't, again, punch hard enough. Like the character arcs weren't really emotional enough for me. Like I was engaged by the story, but not quite enough to justify it being a 5-star book. There were moments in here where I kind of had to push to get through the story, where I felt like my engagement with the plot kind of dropped off a bit, which is upsetting because, again, the world is gorgeous, the writing is absolutely beautiful. Another 4-star book, this is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This book was so brilliantly done, like just an amazing dystopian novel. The very first date in this book is Saturday, July 20th, 2024, so we've now eclipsed the time that this is supposed to be set in. The book was written in the 1990s about a young woman whose name is Lauren Olamina. She lives in this kind of like gated community in a very dystopian version of America, like kind of like in California area, where like government is kind of broken down, the police are very, very corrupt. There is a lot in this book that feels so prophetic, like it's actually kind of scary to read. It was beautifully horrifying. Like there was a lot of violence in here. There's a lot of content warnings in this book. Some people find it quite upsetting to read, but it really just feels like a very honest dystopia. The only reason why I didn't give this book 5 stars is because I just, from a structural perspective and a pacing perspective, it didn't perfectly work for me. There was some things to do with like the magic system. It's not really a magic system at all, but the main character has like special abilities, and I just kind of wish that had have been used a bit more, or had have at least affected the plot a bit more. But this story is genuinely so brilliant. I gave this book 4.5 stars. It was really, really good. It was so close to being a 5-star book, but it just had a few little things that fell down for me. The next book is a reread. This is Turning Point, which is a collection of Hayao Miyazaki's essays and articles and interviews from 1997 to 2008. I'm not going to harp on about this too much or the other rereads on this list because I've already spoken about them to death. I love this book. I love reading Hayao Miyazaki's writing. The big negative I have in this is that like there's not a word on Howl's Moving Castle in here. It's so disappointing. I swear to God, this book talks more about Wallace and Gromit than it does about Howl's Moving Castle. Like Miyazaki loves Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which is just like joy. I loved that when it came out when I was a child. And then I also read the first 1Q84 book. So 1Q84, which is its own novel, but it's split into 3 books. It's kind of a series, but like it's an enormous book. It's like 1,000 pages long. I read the first 1Q84 book, really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. The world building is so cool. The writing is perfect. It isn't quite a 5-star book just yet because there's a few things in here, as there often is with Haruki Murakami, like things that just don't gel with my taste, ways that demographics of people are quite objectified every single time. That aside, I just wanted the world building to go a little bit deeper, but the thing is that this is the first book in a series, so I'm going to give it 4.9 stars, almost a 5-star book. Probably going to end up being a 5-star book, but I need to read the next 2 books in order to actually have an opinion, because obviously this was like setting up the story. We didn't get an ending. I reread Howl's Moving Castle, which I reread at least once a year. 5 stars, perfect. Arguably my favorite book of all time. This is the Folio Society edition. I love this book to pieces. Like just light of my life. 5 stars. I also reread Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. 5 stars, perfect. Love it to bits. Even more beautiful on the second time round. I might even reread it for a 3rd time this year. A slightly more contentious one, Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. The only Haruki Murakami novel I've read that doesn't have magical realism or slightly speculative elements to it. This is a college novel. It is deeply depressing. So many content warnings. Like if you're in a bad headspace, do not pick up this book. Here's the thing. I was really, really ill and I was being dramatic. So went and picked up Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. It did make me feel worse. But it's beautiful. I cried. I had a nice little cathartic cry while reading this book. It's gorgeous. It's so upsetting. Again, as always, Haruki Murakami, there are things in his novels that I don't love that he does, but I love his writing. His writing style is just absolutely beautiful and gorgeous, and I love his books to bits. The next reread is The Anthropocene, reviewed by John Green. I love the audiobook of this. If I'm just like bored, I'll just put this on. I love hearing John Green reading out these little essays on just the most random things. I was listening to this on the plane when my sinuses got all terrible and incredibly painful. If you've not heard that story, I was on a 3-hour flight when I got a really, really bad flare-up of sinusitis, or like it caused my sinusitis. Regardless, if you can picture knives being pushed into your face for 3 hours again and again and again, that is how that felt. And I was listening to the Anthropocene Reviewed at the time. I love this book. It's such a beautiful nonfiction book, one of my most favorite nonfiction books of all time. I will re-listen to it endlessly. The next one is Starting Point, which is the first book in this collection. These are the collected essays from 1979 to 1996. I love this one a lot better than the second one because there's just a lot more depth. There's a lot more breadth as well in terms of the works that he talks about. Like this one, I swear to God, is like half Princess Mononoke, and I love Princess Mononoke, but I do also want to read about his other films as well, particularly Howl's Moving Castle. Anyway, 5 stars. Love this book. Now up to the point where I can speak about the new 5-star books that I've read so far in 2024. The very first one is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which we read for the book club a couple of months ago, I believe. This book was just beautifully written. I almost gave this book a 4.9 stars because the ending, like the pacing, it kind of felt like the story wrapped up a little bit too quickly for me, but I kept it in the 5-star category just kind of based on instinct. Like I felt like the writing was really beautiful, like the setting was so perfectly described. I really, really liked Rebecca as well, like the way they took her characterization. I didn't expect the twists in this story, and so there was a lot that I loved about reading Rebecca, and I would like to reread it. I would like to get a copy of it at some point. The next 3 books I want to talk about are picture books. They're illustrated by John Klassen. Last year, one of my favorite books of the year was The Skull. I just loved the way it was illustrated. It was so funny and beautiful, just a lovely little story. The first book is called I Want My Hat Back. The second book is called This Is Not My Hat, and just the humor of that tickles me so much. Like it's so funny and so silly. Completely different books about completely different characters, but like the way that humor is done in this is so subtle and beautiful. I love the illustrations. I love this style. John Klassen has done some illustration work for Lemony Snicket as well. And then the third book is called We Found a Hat. Absolutely gorgeous picture books, 5 stars. I love it to bits. Very exciting. We're now moving on to my 3 favorite books of the year so far. First one is The Ladies of Grace Adieu by Susanna Clarke. Now this is the last Susanna Clarke novel I had to read. She has 3 novels in total: Jonathan Strange, Piranesi, and also this one, which is a collection of short stories set in the world of Jonathan, well, not entirely set in the world of Jonathan Strange, but sort of more in the Jonathan Strange voice. I thought this was so beautiful. I definitely want to reread it. I can't describe the plot because it's all different short stories, but if you love Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I definitely recommend picking up this book. I loved how different some of the stories were. Like there was a very fairy tale quality to a lot of them. There was some interesting poetical things going on. I love Susanna Clarke. I definitely want to reread this because I kind of just at the time tore through it because I was so excited to have another Susanna Clarke book, and so I definitely want to reread it very soon. My second favorite book of the year so far is Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. So as I said, I've already read the first book in this series. We read this for the book club, and then I decided to go and pick up the second book, and oh my god, I adored it. Like it's again like the first book. There's a lot of violence in here. There's a lot of very confronting content in here. If you're a person who needs content warnings, please go look them up before you read this book. But it was just amazingly done, like so heartbreaking. I write notes on every book that I read because I like to summarize my thoughts and feelings, and my entire note for this book is "F you." The betrayal, the twists and turns of the story, the way that this series went into the dystopian storytelling, and the way it kind of wrapped up everyone's story is the best of a dystopian I've read so far. It was so good. It was so incredibly good. Like I love the nuance here. Like the story went in a way that I wasn't expecting. I love the characters. I love that this book kind of turns the narrative voice of the first book on its head. I cannot tell you why because it's a spoiler, but we get into the story and all of a sudden we start questioning things that we maybe didn't question before. Everything that I wanted to be stronger in this book was fixed in this book, and it was a absolute masterpiece. Like it's so good. And also again, this book is even more prophetic than the first one. There's a kind of leader in America who's followed by all of these extreme people, and his catchphrase is like, to make America great again. Such a harrowing and powerful story, and definitely my favorite Octavia E. Butler novel I've ever read. And then my final book, my favorite favorite book of 2024 so far. I have been talking about this book for like over a year, and I promised you guys in the last video that if I mentioned it again, it'll be because I'd read it. And it is Strange Beasts of China by Yang Ge, translated from the Mandarin by Jeremy Tiang. I adored this book. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I loved every moment of this story, and I felt like such idiot for taking so long to read it, because I've been meaning to get to this book next for like a year or like a year and a half. I ordered this online at the now defunct Booktopia rip, but it was so beautiful. It's this story about a young woman she's a writer and a novelist, but she was at university studying to be a zoologist, and she's in this city in China where beasts sort of roam around with people, and the beasts are very humanoid, and so it's like different like kinds of people, and they'll have like certain like beastly qualities, and the story is chopped up into the like stories of these different beasts in this city. And so it kind of feels like short stories, but there's very much an overall narrative here. I loved the characterization, I loved the punches of this story, I loved the twists and the turns. I did guess one of the bigger twists kind of early on, but not in a way that like dissuaded from my enjoyment of the story. I thought that the beasts were a kind of beautiful allegory for humans and different kinds of people, and it was so good. It was so brilliantly done. I definitely want to check out more of Yang Ge's other writing. I definitely want to reread this book at some point. I did go and read the reviews for this book, and it turns out that a lot of people don't have the same opinion as me. I think this book was very, very divisive, and I think one of the things with this book is you have to read it slowly, and you have to pay kind of close attention to certain kinds of things to get the emotional punches of the story. Like there was a little bit here that was kind of done in the subtext, like you had to pay attention to, well, if this person is relevant to that person because of this reason, then this means that. If you're willing to do that work, this story hits really, really hard because you'll pick up on the things. A lot of people didn't get this book, and a lot of people found it kind of dull, so if you pick it up, I hope you enjoy it. It's quite divisive apparently, but I adored it. I thought the writing was so beautiful. I loved the setting, world building, character, dialogue was amazing in this book. It was just weird and beautiful and so unique, and I so recommend it. That was my favorite book of 2024 so far, Strange Beasts of China, now one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you got some lovely book recommendations out of it. I have been filming for an hour and 18 minutes. I also wanted to say before I leave a really quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Without them, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. Over on Patreon, we have a whole bunch of lovely bonus content. We have our book club, our Discord server. I also, of course, upload bespoke videos. So last month I did a favorites, like 2024 favorites, movies and cosmetics and games and all these things. So if you want to support my work and get some bonus content from me, please feel free to check out Patreon. Take care everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.